Sailing downwind in the Bandit IF can be a bit of an art. The key is learning to use the spinnaker correctly. The boat's designed to use either the jib or the spinnaker, but not both at the same time. When you're changing between the two, the rule is raise one, lower one. You want to raise the new sail first, then lower the old one. This helps keep the speed loss to a minimum during the change. Now, wind is the driving force in any kind of sailing, and I want to make sure you understand how it works before we talk about the specifics of sailing with the spinnaker. There are two types of wind in sailing, and these are true wind and apparent wind. True wind is the direction and speed the wind is actually blowing, and let's use the default second life wind, which is out of the north at 15 knots. Apparent wind is the wind that the boat senses, and this is the wind that's actually used by the sails. The apparent wind is measured relative to the bow of the boat, and the range is from 0 degrees at the bow to 180 degrees at the stern and along either side. If the bow of the boat is pointed directly into the true wind, the boat is going to sense a wind angle of 0. If we turn the boat, the true wind stays the same, but the angle of the relative wind changes. And we read this apparent wind angle on the bottom row of display screens in the cockpit of the IF. The left screen labeled AWA gives us the apparent wind angle, and the right screen labeled wind gives us the apparent wind speed. Pretty simple so far, but it does get a little more complicated once the boat starts to move. That is because the apparent wind is also affected by the movement of the boat. The forward speed of the boat causes the boat to sense that the apparent wind angle is actually moving forward towards the bow. The amount of change in the angle forward is not dependent on the wind speed. It's actually determined by a ratio of boat speed and angle to the true wind. You're going to get the same amount of forward movement if the wind is blowing at 5 knots or 25 knots. Now, you do get the largest change in angle when sailing at a 90-degree apparent wind angle. At this particular angle, the wind is going to move about 30 degrees forward. The change in angle gradually decreases as the apparent wind angle increases, and once you're sailing directly with the wind at an angle of 180 degrees, there's no change in angle at all. Now, the next thing we need to understand is track. Track is the course that the boat is actually sailing. For all practical purposes in second life sailing, our heading is our track. You can use any compass you like. I happen to use the USB Pro HUD, and the window in the upper right-hand corner gives us our heading. Let's see how true wind, apparent wind, and track are all related. So here's our boat. It's at a 90-degree angle to the true wind, and the boat is not moving. The cockpit shows us that the AWA is 90, and the wind speed is 15 knots. As the boat accelerates, we have two options. We can maintain our track and simply trim the sails as the wind moves forward. Once the boat stabilizes, you can see that the AWA has moved forward from 90 degrees up to 62 degrees. That's a change of 28 degrees. However, our track remains at a 90-degree angle to the downwind course of the true wind. The other option is to maintain a constant apparent wind angle, and we use this a lot when sailing downwind. As the wind shifts forward, we simply turn the boat downwind to maintain this constant wind angle. Once it stabilizes, you can see that our track has changed by a little more than 30 degrees. So we are sailing a track that is at roughly a 60-degree angle to the direct downwind track. Now, sailing at an apparent wind angle of 90 degrees happens to be the fastest point of sail in the IF. Now, we can use the spinnaker when the apparent wind angle is from about 125 down to 180 degrees, and because of the forward shift, we are actually sailing in an area that is about 30 degrees either side of directly downwind. We're not able to trim or adjust the spinnaker. Once it's raised, it simply moves with the apparent wind. If you do try to sail a wind angle that is too low or too close to the wind, the spinnaker is going to luff. The only way to correct this is to turn the boat downwind until the spinnaker fills. Trying to trim with the mainsail will have no effect on a luffing spinnaker. Now you are able to trim the mainsail, and proper trim can really affect the performance. The IF uses the familiar color system to show the sail trim. I always use the term the green panel shows that the sail is roughly in trim, and here's why I say that. This green range, particularly when we're sailing at the higher apparent wind angles that we use sailing downwind, is quite wide. If you're sailing at an apparent wind angle of 140 degrees, this green range on the mainsail is from about 58 all the way out to 82 degrees. It just so happens that the old adage, set the sail at 1/2 the apparent wind angle, is right in the middle of this range at 70 degrees. However, you're going to find that the sails actually perform better if they're trimmed to the loose end of the range. Now in this example, the wind speed is set to 18 knots. Here we see the mainsail, and it's set to the tight end of the green range. If you adjust it in any more, the panels are going to turn blue and the tailtails will droop. The speed at this trim is 7.7 knots. If we move forward towards the loose end of the range, here's what we see. Here the sail is trimmed just to the point that the sail is going to luff. The speed is 8.9 knots. The loose end of the range gives us a speed increase of about 16% over having the sail trimmed too tightly. Now, after a lot of testing on these wind angles, I've started using the following. I set the boom angle of the mainsail to 1/2 of the apparent wind angle and then add an extra 10 degrees. So for a wind angle of 140 degrees, I set the boom to 80 degrees. Now to fine-tune the sails like this, you do need to use a gesture. You can use whatever you like, but I happen to use the shift plus the up or down arrow keys to do this. Earlier I said that the usable range of the spinnaker began at an apparent wind angle of 125 degrees. That's correct, but in order to use the spinnaker at an AWA of 125 and even down to 130 degrees, the boat speed needs to be very close to its maximum speed relative to the true wind speed. You need to have the full forward shift in the wind, which has allowed us to turn the boat a little bit further downwind. In order to get this full shift, we need a boat speed that is high enough in relation to the true wind speed. The stronger the wind, the faster the boat speed required. If you are slow and still accelerating and try to raise the spinnaker is going to luff. Now you can sail this 125-degree wind angle using the mainsail and the jib until the speed stabilizes, then change to the spinnaker. If the spinnaker still luffs, drop down to a little bit higher wind angle, readjust the mainsail, and as the boat speed increases, gradually work your way back up to 125 degrees. Now sailing at a wind angle of 125 degrees is simply more difficult and requires more attention. The small increase in speed over sailing at a slightly higher wind angle simply may not be worth it. If you're new to all of this, I would certainly sail down in the higher wind angles from 130 down to 150 degrees. An AWA of 140 is really a nice place to start. Now there is a very simple maneuver that we need to learn, and it's called a gybe. A gybe is nothing more than a turn in which the stern of the boat passes through the wind. You simply turn downwind and keep turning until you're sailing on the other tack. It's a pretty simple maneuver, and this little video will show you what it looks like, but take note of the following. The spinnaker starts to move as soon as the boat turns because the apparent wind is changing. And the mainsail is going to stay in place until after the stern of the boat passes through the wind, and then it's going to swing abruptly to the other side on its own. Now in this example, we're going to sail that apparent wind angle of 140 degrees, and we're going to jibe through the wind to the same wind angle on the other tack. The nice thing about all this is the sails are powered all the way through the jibe, and there's very little loss in speed. If you're just going from side to side on the same wind angle, you don't even have to touch the sails. The mainsail is already set for this specific wind angle, and the spinnaker trims on its own. If you overshoot and the spinnaker starts to luff, simply turn the boat a little downwind until the sails fill. For you new sailors, it's not as complicated as it might seem. You point the boat in the direction you want to sail, you let the boat speed stabilize, and then you check your apparent wind angle. If that wind angle is 140 degrees or greater, raise the spinnaker and then lower the jib. You adjust the mainsail to 1/2 the apparent wind plus 10 degrees, and you sail to your next point. As you approach your next point, you look and see how much you need to turn, and if it's going to put you out of the range of the spinnaker, raise the jib, lower the spinnaker before you turn. It's actually pretty simple and just takes a little bit of practice. Now let's talk about sailing downwind more efficiently and how to apply what we learned to racing. Of the whole usable range of the spinnaker, sailing directly downwind, the boat gives us the slowest boat speed. With a wind speed of 18 knots coming from directly astern, the boat only manages a speed of a little over 6 knots. Now the boat speed is actually the greatest at the lowest AWA for the spinnaker of 130 degrees. As we turn downwind, the wind angle increases, however the boat speed decreases. The decrease is fairly gradual until we reach an AWA of 150 degrees. At that point, the mainsail is all the way out, but because of the slight angle, is still producing some lift. As we go past 150 degrees, the speed decreases much more rapidly, and mostly because beyond this angle, the mainsail is being pushed and is generating very little lift. On a direct downwind course, sailing any of the lower wind angles results in us sailing a track that is at an angle to the true downwind course. So instead of sailing like this, we will be sailing a course that looks like this. We're going to be sailing faster, but also sailing a longer distance. The issue becomes, how do we find the sweet spot where the speed increase and the increased distance gives us the best advantage over sailing directly downwind. The key to being able to figure all of this out is this track angle. We need to know how far off of the true wind course we are actually sailing. Once we know that, the computations become fairly simple. At an apparent wind angle of 130 degrees, our track is 30 degrees from the downwind track. At an AWA of 140, our track angle is 25 degrees, and at an AWA of 150, our track is 20 degrees from the direct downwind track. These are the three angles that you need to remember. Now again, all of this is relative to the true wind. We don't need to know headings. In fact, we don't care about headings, and we don't really even need to know the actual wind. If we are sailing a known wind angle with the sail properly trimmed and our speed stabilized, we just need to know this track angle. Now the lowest wind angle does give us the fastest boat speed, but the higher track angle also means that the boat is sailing the longest distance. Once we know this track angle, we can compute this distance, and with the distance and knowing the speed, we can compute the time. And yeah, I know the engineers and math majors are jumping up and down, and the liberal arts types are going, yeah, I sort of remember skipping that class. It's enough to make my head explode, but it works. And this little chart sums it all up. You see the apparent wind angles. This is the track angle from the direct downwind track. And these are the percentage increases in speed and then distance compared to sailing directly downwind. The last column is what I call the overall advantage in percent, and it's simply the increase in speed less the increase in distance. You can see that the advantage is at its peak at an AWA of 130 and gradually decreases down to 150 AWA. Now, as we sail along this course, at some point we need to turn towards our target, and this is where our track angle again comes into play. At any point along here, if we turn downwind by the amount of the track angle, we're sailing directly downwind. However, when we do turn, we want to be pointed towards our target and on the same wind angle. In order to do this, we need to compute a gybe angle, and this is simply double our track angle. If our track angle from the true wind is 25 degrees, our gybe angle is 50 degrees. So now let's go back and take another look at the USB Pro HUD, and this is where it really shines. This little window labeled BTT stands for bearing to target. The needle will swing side to side to show whether the target is on the port or the starboard side of the boat. What is the most important is this numerical readout. Now in our example, we're sailing a track that is at an angle of 25 degrees from downwind. We're on a 140 AWA. On a course where we make one gybe, we simply sail our desired wind angle. Our turn point is going to be when the BTT equals our gybe angle. Now, depending on how far we are from our next point, we may have to lead this a little bit. The closer we are, the more we were going to need to lead this turn. When we reach our turn point, we simply gybe to the same wind angle on the other tack, and if we've done all of this correctly, there's our target. Now, if the target point is not directly downwind, we sail this exactly the same way. An offset wind will change our turn point, but not our gybe angle. The geometry relative to the true wind does not change. If the wind is far enough to one side, we may be able to simply sail our desired wind angle directly to the next point. In our first example, we sailed so that we only made one gybe. That's fine if you have a lot of open water, but if you need to or just want to keep it in closer, sailing like this gives us the same distance and almost exactly the same time. And sailing down a single row of sims is actually not a bad way to do it. The less sim crossings, the better. It also prevents you from hitting a corner. If we do sail like this, we also gain another bit of information from the BTT. As we zigzag back and forth, every time our bearing to target equals the track angle, we know we are directly upwind from the target point. It's just a handy little aid to help keep you oriented. Now here's the video, and I'm going to comment on it as we go through it. I am sailing to a finish line that is directly downwind, and the point entered into my USB HUD is the middle of that gate. Here I am on a starboard tack, and if you look at the BTT, it shows 25 degrees port. 25 is my track difference angle, so I know that the middle of the finish line is directly downwind. I want to approach the line on starboard tack, so I'm going to continue for this for a little bit longer. Now I'm back on a port tack and I'm directly upwind of the middle of the line. This time I'm going to stay on this tack until I make that final jibe. I'm approaching the finish line. You can see it off to the right, and right now I still have three options. My jibe angle to the middle of the line is going to be a little bit before 50, bearing to target, and I'm going to need to lead it a little bit since I am moving pretty fast and fairly close to the line. At this point, if I need to change and go to the red pin, I would just turn early, causing me to undershoot the middle point. If I need to go to the green pin, I'd just start the turn a little bit late. Causes a little bit of an overshoot to the middle of the line. It really makes no difference time-wise. So there you have it. This video was a long time coming. I hope you find it useful. This is the last in the series. Calm seas and fair winds.
Happy trails to you until